There's been a lot of national discussion about just what's happening in British Columbia vis-a-vis the provincial and federal governments and the condo industry. Various plans afoot to seemingly put Canadians into affordable housing using a slump in condo sales as the opportunity to help shed some light on the intricacies of what this all involves, the policy involved, and the potential challenges and opportunities. A real pleasure to welcome back on Hub Hits Beau Jarvis, the CEO of Wesgroup Properties, coming to us from Vancouver. Beau, great to be in conversation again.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me.
Well, let's start with some basics. We've had some details, it seems, on the plan over the last few days, primarily from the government of British Columbia. What's your take as to the latest information that you and your fellow developers are understanding vis-a-vis what the province and the federal government actually wants to do with these vacant units?
Well, I guess the latest plan that we understand is that, and it's evolving quickly. Obviously, there's a significant amount of criticism regarding this plan, and we can get into that in a minute. But as far as what we understand, the latest incarnation of the plan to be is that it won't work in the city of Vancouver because the costs of the units are too high, and they're focused more on the Fraser Valley, Vancouver Island, and the Okanagan. As well as it's some form of rent-to-own program. And so, again, I think probably, if you wouldn't mind, I wouldn't mind just conveying that
Yeah.
our industry has been advocating for stronger housing policy, and policy in particular that is meant to reduce the cost of delivery. And we've been collaborating with all levels of government a lot over the last couple of years as this cost of delivery crisis has sort of, grown. This was not one of the policies that
Yeah.
we have been advocating for. And so, you're asking me my thoughts on the most recent sort of developments as it relates to this policy idea. It's not something we had advocated for. It's not something we've thought out. It's
Right.
not, we were not consulted. And so we're as up to speed, I would say, as perhaps, anybody who's reading the news.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So what do you think the government, primarily of British Columbia, because I think as the plans have come out, it seems like the majority of public expenditures will be at the provincial level with a small contribution percentage-wise from the feds. What are they trying to do here, Beau? Because you're right, the real challenge, they know what it is. It's the explosion in development costs. Up until recently, surging land costs, inflation, the effects of that on the entire building process. And it seems like what's being suggested here, Beau, just leaves all of that unresolved, unanswered. Do I have that right?
Yeah, generally, yes. I mean, there's a genesis of this, and I think it's important to, I guess, go backwards a few months here. And so again, our industry has been advocating heavily for relief on development cost charges, community amenity contributions, general taxation of housing, of new housing, which we now it's well documented that up to 30% of the cost of new housing is fees, levies, and taxes by all levels of government. And so we've been advocating heavily for that. We've also been advocating heavily for, stronger policy in terms of the regulatory framework around approvals. And indeed, there's been a lot of good policy that's coming out. And so about 2 months ago, the federal government with the province of Ontario announced widening the aperture of the GST exemption,
Right.
which the federal government has provided an exemption for new purpose-built rental as well as first-time home buyers. We were trying to broaden that exemption to all new housing purchases. And then, so as well as development cost charge reductions. And indeed, a couple of months ago with the province of Ontario, as I said, an announcement came out on both those fronts, which we felt was extremely positive. In British Columbia, we were seeking the same outcome.
Yeah.
The federal government had set aside some capital to basically, do some of that policy work, and they wanted to spread that around Canada. And BC was sort of the next province to have the conversation, given that Ontario and BC are sort of where the biggest problems are as far as cost of delivery. And the DCC announcement here in BC also happened on the same day where they announced this sort of standing inventory acquisition program, we'll call it. So we were very, very happy with the DCC announcement, which is a reduction of up to 50% for 3 years. That's very strong policy and is very helpful. And this other policy kind of came out of left field. So again, that's the genesis of it. And so I guess the idea is that they believe there is an opportunity, and Carney has come out and said this, and so has our premier here in BC, to acquire standing inventory from developers at a deep discount. And I guess that is founded in the belief that they can acquire that inventory or new homes at a cost that is lower than it would cost them to deliver it and far less risky. So I think there's a significant debate unfolding about whether that's the best use of taxpayer money. I would have chosen many policies before this one, but I think an important component of this in the debate is to deliberate as to whether there is some truth in the strategy, I think.
Well, and as you said, it leaves Vancouver right now, according to Premier Eby, off the table, so to speak, when it comes to a rent-to-own scheme, which, in terms of the number of unsold units, the addition of more unsold inventory coming onto the market, I would assume, Beau, that, great that maybe this rolls out in the Fraser Valley or elsewhere, but as percentages go, the majority of inventory that could be available to governments to purchase surely is in the city of Vancouver and its immediate surroundings.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Yeah.
And I think that I suspect the premier is sort of walking back the program here as the criticism unfolds. I don't know that it was that well thought out, to be honest, is my observation. And this is why, I think we had advocated for widening the aperture of the GST exemption. It doesn't discriminate against the type of housing and where it is. It would perhaps help the standing inventory problem, but it's also the purchaser who benefits. It's not it's not targeted. I think one of the issues
isn't the problem beneath a lot of this, though. It's the addiction of municipal governments to development charges, that we've ended up in a scenario whereby those charges have exploded. They've become a major and important revenue source. Bureaucracy has expanded, especially within the planning departments, as those charges have allowed governments to, in a sense, scale up, riding what was up until recently a once-in-a-generation housing boom. It seems to me, Beau, that what's happening here is that governments don't want to right-size. They don't want to right-size for a real estate market post-boom. They want the same amount of revenue, and in this case, it'll be the federal or provincial governments that will come in and, as you say, reduce development costs, but they'll reduce those development costs by making the municipalities whole. So again, as a little bit of a skeptic here, I'm just wondering, is all of this just a giant can-kicking exercise, that the fundamental issues around affordability aren't being addressed, the fundamental issues around the extent and scope to which government has grown through development charges isn't being right-sized? Where is the fundamental reform happening?
So you raise a super valid question regarding, are we getting to the heart of the problem? And what we're doing with these DCC reductions, proposed DCC reductions for a short period of time over a few years, is indeed just dealing with the symptoms of the real problem. And the real problem is that municipalities and regional governments have indeed become drunk on development cost charges and community entity contributions. And so what we really need to be doing is looking at new ways to fund municipal infrastructure in Canada. And there are several tools that are used worldwide, and in particular south of the border. What is most commonly used is what's referred to as a tax-free municipal bond. And utility jurisdictions are effectively set up. Some referred to as a MUD, a municipal utility district. And these are set up to issue bonds. And what it does is it crowds in private capital, doctors, lawyers, dentists, or whoever wants this as part of their investment portfolio. And the dividends or the yield is tax-free. And so then it crowds in the capital to actually build out the infrastructure, as opposed to whether it's taxpayers or all new homeowners paying for all of the infrastructure. The other thing is the infrastructure is amortized over the life of the infrastructure, where typically we have much smaller amortization periods here in Canada, which drives up the cost. So there's, again, you raise a valid point. We need to be looking at new ways to fund municipal infrastructure in Canada. And we need to, and I would say that those conversations are happening, certainly at the federal level and the provincial level, and we are having those conversations right now. So I am optimistic about that.
Yeah, well, I love the policy innovation. I think just finally, Beau, I think it doesn't just come back to the fact that property taxes probably are not where they should be. And the reality is that municipalities, as kind of children of the provinces, are chronically underfunded. And politically, I get it. If you're a councillor, the last thing you want to be doing is going into the next election with a a heavy property tax increase of the type that we would need to free our cities from, again, I think you said it, just drunk on development charges and basically alternative sources of revenue. So to wrap this all up, Beau, I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I think in some ways the bailout, while it's gotten a lot of attention, is kind of a distraction from what is, as you say, an environment where we're still waiting on the fundamental reform. But if you could just speak maybe lastly just to the reality of municipalities today and the extent to which they deliver so many services to Canadians, and yet they do so with limited taxing power and maybe frankly without as much political courage as might be actually needed at the municipal level to kind of right-size their fiscal house and deliver both housing and services in a sustainable way with a level of taxation that's actually commensurate to the services that people consume.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just sort of rest on your statement of getting the fiscal house in order. I think municipalities have widened or broadened their scope beyond generally what a municipality should be concerned with.
Yeah.
And so, obviously infrastructure is what we're talking about right now, and that is what a municipality should be delivering. And indeed, municipalities have been left to kind of fend for themselves in that regard, as immigration has, grown over the last several years. I guess not in last year, but before that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that municipalities really need to have an honest conversation about what their role is as government. We've seen the public sector grow significantly at all levels of government, and municipalities are right there in that camp.
Yeah.
And so I think this has a lot to do with looking in their own kitchen and understanding what their budgets are, and starting to have an honest conversation about budget reduction, as well as this conversation about financing municipal infrastructure. So, and all of that relates to property taxes. But that's my sort of opinion on how municipalities are operating.
It's backed up by the facts. I think the growth of municipal government over the last decade, not at 40% levels like the feds, but average across Canada, 30-odd% growth in headcount across all municipal governments in the last 10 years. That's a hefty bill that somebody's got to be paying. And in fact, I think we're all sympathetic that developers have had to shoulder a lion's share of that bureaucratic bloat. Well, Beau Jarvis, Wesgroup Properties, thank you so much for coming on. We always rely on your thoughtful commentary and analysis of all things real estate related, and great to have a perspective from on the ground there in beautiful Vancouver.
Thanks very much for having me.
Bye-bye. If you're enjoying these Hub Hits, please head over to our YouTube channel, be one of the over 75,000 subscribers. Yes, we hit that 75,000 mark in a little over a year. Thank you for liking and sharing the Hub's YouTube content. Or if you're on your favorite audio platform listening to the Hub, share with friends and family. Join the over 250,000 people who've listened to a Hub download on their audio device in the last 30 days. I'm Rudyard Griffiths, publisher of the Hub. Back to you again soon with your next Hub Hit.